Tonight, an unprecedented interview with an undercover FBI operative who secretly lives and works among the terrorists of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. His name is a national secret, but in 2012, Al-Qaeda knew him as Tamer el-Nouri. They thought he was a wealthy Arab American with seething anger at the United States, but in reality, he had dedicated himself to the war on terror the morning of 9/11.
I remember thinking, please God, don't let this be a terrorist attack. Please God. And that's how naive I was. That's how naive we all were at that time.
Tamer el-Nouri, one of his many aliases, immigrated from Egypt as a child and was raised in New Jersey in a traditional Islamic home.
We're not at war with Islam. We're at war with radicals. I am a Muslim. I am an American, and I've been serving my country for 22 years and counting. And I am appalled at what these animals are doing to my country while desecrating my religion.
Devoted to Islam and America, comfortable working alone amid killers, he was a rare find for the FBI's undercover counterterrorism group.
It's called the National Security Covert Operations Unit.
And what did the guys in the unit call it?
It's not the guys, it's me. I jokingly refer to it as the Dirty Arabs Group.
The Dirty Arabs Group.
Yes.
Your bosses must have loved that.
Dark humor is part of the trade. In a new book, American Radical, he writes about infiltrating terrorist groups at home and abroad. He wrote the book, he told us, so that fellow Americans could understand how the Islam he knows is tortured by terrorists trying to justify mayhem. We disguised him and changed his voice so he could tell us about one of the biggest investigations of his career. The target was a 30-year-old Tunisian who was working toward a PhD at a Canadian university. It was in 2012 that routine surveillance of Shahab Esagayer's phone calls and travels gave Canadian intelligence and the FBI reasons to worry.
Shahab was talking to some really bad folks overseas. He made 2 trips to Iran and a handful of other intelligence gathering evidence that was presented to us that led us to believe that we needed to figure out who he was.
Esagayer had a visa to attend an academic conference in the United States, so the FBI wanted Tamer el-Nouri to dangle himself as bait, just in case Esagayer was recruiting for Al-Qaeda.
What did you do then?
I crafted my legend and made myself recruitable. I wanted him to choose me. I wanted him to go to bed that night, wondering what he could do to become my friend.
His legend, or false biography, was that of a wealthy Arab American real estate investor with a painful private grudge.
How did you meet?
We met on a flight from Houston to San Jose, California.
Not by accident.
We met on a flight from Houston to San Jose, California.
That planned accidental meeting in June 2012 is called a bump, as in bumping into someone. They boarded as strangers, and fate did the rest.
People were in his seat, people were in my seat. It was a legitimate mix-up. And as I was talking to the flight attendant, he noticed that I had a long beard, that I looked Middle Eastern, and probably was a Muslim. So he poked his head over and he said, "Batakallam Arabi," which means, "Do you speak Arabic?" in Arabic. I said, "Taban, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh." And he looked at me and he said, "Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullah." I knew it. And then the conversation proceeded in Arabic. He then turned to the other flight attendant and said, "We must sit together." He insisted. He chose me.
The whole key to the thing is to make it their idea.
That's correct.
What is the process that you go through to get into one of these roles?
It starts that morning that I'm traveling, assuming I'm traveling covertly in alias. I take a shower and I put on, for this case, I put on Tamer's clothes. I put on Tamer's watch, his shoes. I drive Hammer's car. His wallet's in my pocket. His phone is on me. And I drive to the beach, and I sit at the beach, and I talk to myself out loud like a crazy person, reciting everything there is to know about Tamer el-Nouri, his company, his family, his legend, over and over.
The FBI created a history for Tamer el-Nouri, an online presence, an actual office for his investment company where a receptionist answered the phone. There were ownership records, a home, fake IDs, and, critical to the legend, there was a false personal tragedy. El-Nouri's fake background said that his mother had died of neglect in a U.S. hospital because of anti-Muslim discrimination. That lie completed the picture of a wealthy Arab American who had a reason to hate. Shahab Essegayer thought that his new friend was made to order, which of course he was. For 10 months, the men drew close. Essegayer twisted the Quran to justify attacking the West. He admitted that his trips to Iran were for meetings with a senior Al-Qaeda leader. Surveillance showed that Essegayer was checking Tamer el-Nouri's backstory, and one night in a basement in Toronto, el-Nouri was grilled by Essegayer and 3 accomplices.
What do you do? How do you do it? Is it real? Is it commercial real estate? Is it residential? What do you do when you fly here? What do you do here? It sounded like an interrogation.
This interrogation was so sharp, el-Nouri feared that his cover had been blown. He analyzed the room in case he had to escape.
But the cop within you had figured out where the exit was and had decided what order he was going to shoot the people in the room in if it came to that.
Well, absolutely. At that point, as you get older and slower, you realize you always go for the young ones first.
Which leads me to ask, in all seriousness, where does the courage come from?
I can make the argument that you're probably more in danger crossing the street here in New York City than I am when I'm embedded in an Al-Qaeda cell. If my legend holds up, I'm worth so much more to them. Safe. They protect me more than they protect their own, because Tamer el-Nouri means access to the West.
He passed the grilling and was enlisted in what Al-Qaeda hoped would be its long, frustrated encore to 9/11.
He was planning on derailing a train from New York City to Toronto.
How was he going to do that?
Well, that changed multiple times. It was either break up the tracks, use explosives. When the bottom line was that train was getting derailed over a bridge that had as little water as possible to ensure the deaths of everyone on that train.
Was this just some kind of pipe dream?
No, that was his tasking from Al-Qaeda.
The Via Rail train carries hundreds of passengers from New York to Toronto. In September 2012, Essegayer, el-Nouri, and another man cased this bridge near Toronto, the scene of the planned attack. As a surveillance team watched overhead, el-Nouri recorded Shahab Essegayer explaining how the disaster would unfold.
It would seem that you have plenty to arrest Shahab on at this point. Why does the investigation keep going?
Because Shahab revealed to me that there was an American sleeper. He told me that there was an American version of him, and that although he didn't know who he was told by his trainers, Al-Qaeda senior leadership, that they would put the two of them together when the time was right.
There was an Al-Qaeda American agent inside the United States.
And that's what Shahab believed, and I believed him.
The possibility of an Al-Qaeda agent in America took the investigation in a new direction. Tamer el-Nouri lured Essegayer to New York City in the hope of developing leads. Essegayer asked el-Nouri to show him the sights, including Times Square.
He didn't see Times Square the way a foreigner would. He saw it as an opportunity to kill Americans.
An opportunity, Essegayer suggested, for a future New Year's Eve, when more than 100,000 people would fill the streets.
Multiple explosions that were timed about 5 to 10 seconds apart. As one went off, he thought about where the crowd would then run to, and that's where he wanted the next bomb to go off. Maximum carnage, maximum casualties.
He expected to get away with derailing the train so that he could go on to Times Square next.
Exactly. Shihab said that Al-Qaeda shifted gears. After 9/11, they lost some of their best minds. No more martyrdom. They didn't want to lose soldiers anymore, people with access to the West. So you do what you can, get out, hide, and do it again.
After his visit to Times Square, Essegier wanted to see where the Twin Towers had fallen.
And as he was rubbing his beard and his arm was around me, he said, "Tamer, this place needs another 9/11, and we're going to give it to him." I saw red at that moment. It was the hardest time in my career to stay professional. Here I am on hallowed ground, and he said that to me. At that very moment, I could feel a pen in the pocket of my jacket. I envisioned stabbing him in the eye and drop him dead right where he stood.
You very nearly blew your cover.
Yes, well, it's part of what we do, though. We pretend to be someone we loathe while hanging out with people we hate. Maybe it was the culmination of everything that was happening, the stress and pressure of identifying the sleeper, Shihab's rants about the West, whatever. But the point was, I almost broke that night, but thankfully for the case, I didn't.
The FBI wanted more time, but in April 2013, the Boston Marathon was attacked. And 1 week later, the Canadian government insisted on wrapping up its Al-Qaeda cell. Shihab Essegier and the accomplice on the bridge were tried, convicted, and sentenced to life. But the trail to the American sleeper, if he existed, went cold.
There hasn't been a day since April 22nd, 2013, when I've woken up, no matter where I am, that I don't think about the American sleeper.
Tamer El-Nouri's book, American Radical, was cleared for publication after an FBI review. The Bureau is keeping him out of action for a while to make sure that his identity isn't uncovered after the book and our interview. Terrorism has come to mean Islamic extremism. But the fact is, since 9/11, more than twice as many Americans have been murdered by white supremacists. This threat exploded into view this past August when a protest aimed at a Civil War monument in Charlottesville, Virginia, ended with 1 dead and 19 injured. No one understands the white supremacist movement as well as Christian Picciolini. He knows it because he helped build it. This is the story of an American terrorist, his long journey to redemption, and his struggle now to lift others from the depths of hate.
You hated black people.
I thought I did.
You hated Jews.
I thought I did.
You wanted to kill them.
At that time, I did.
Christian Picciolini was not born to hate. He was taught. His education began in the Chicago suburb of Blue Island. He was 14, at odds with his Italian immigrant parents, and lost.
I had been bullied and picked on for, everything from my name to my short stature to my parents not being able to speak English very well. And I just never fit in. I never had.
And one of Picciolini's neighbors was a national figure in the neo-Nazi movement.
When you first met this man in the alleyway and then the rest of the skinheads in that town, what was it that they were promising you?
They promised me paradise. They promised me that they would take me out of whatever hell I was living in, whether that was abandonment or marginalization. And to a degree, they delivered. They did give me a new identity. I was now this powerful person. And they gave me a community that accepted me.
That community was a racist gang with its own culture and its own music. That's Picciolini with a song that he wrote called White Power.
The white man fighting for our race. We'll finish our foes with a boot to the face.
The music gave me very specific focus on what was happening to me. And it was trying to give me the answers of why that was happening.
And what were those answers?
Those answers were that everybody was against me as a white man, that I was being intentionally ostracized, and that diversity was a code word for white genocide, and that if I didn't protect my proud European heritage, that we would be wiped out.
By the time he reached Eisenhower High School, he had turned to violence. On his last day there, he beat up the same black student twice.
And I was brought down to the office and to the principal's office, who was also a black woman. And in that office, I got in a very heated physical argument with the security guard, Mr. Holmes.
That's security guard Johnny Holmes, who has never forgotten what he saw in the principal's office that day.
She put her arms around Chris. He said, "You black bitch, get your filthy hands off of me."
There were some words that I said to the principal that were not very kind. In fact, they were disgusting and very racist.
Then he turned from her to me, and he started to poke me in my chest like this, and he went on to say that how he lived to see the day where a nigger was hanging from every light pole in Blue Island.
And he really got in my face to try and stop me, and subdued me until the police came, and the police arrested me.
Picciolini was expelled for the sixth and last time, which only made him more committed.
That is me in 1994, looking very much like somebody who is a terrorist. I am, at this point, the leader of an organization of skinheads, and the people standing behind me are my soldiers, people that would have done anything for me.
And that last picture, where are you?
I am standing in front of the gates of Dachau concentration camp in Germany.
Dachau, where an estimated 41,000 were murdered, mostly Jews.
What are you thinking?
I was thinking that I wanted to burn the world down because I was so angry at it.
The anger led Picciolini to recruit dozens of new members and unleash them on a campaign of assault, vandalism, and burglary. The violence reached its peak one night when Picciolini and his soldiers chased a black man out of a restaurant.
We caught that individual and we proceeded to beat him brutally. And at one point when I was kicking him on the ground and his face was swollen, covered in blood, he opened his eyes and they connected with mine. That was the first time I felt empathy for one of my victims. And that was the last time I hurt anybody.
It took years from that moment for Picciolini to turn around. His wife and children left him. He went through 5 years of depression. But ultimately, he says, his anger began to cool as he was confronted by kindness, blacks and Jews who refused to return the hate.
The truth is, I'd never met or had a meaningful dialogue or engagement with anybody that I thought I hated. And when they took the step to try and reach me, the demonization of them that I had in my head started to crack.
Thank you. 20 years later, 44-year-old Christian Picciolini is making amends. This was a United Nations peace conference in Geneva. In the U.S., he trains police, the FBI, and Homeland Security in the mindset and tactics of the white supremacy movement.
You know, 30 years ago, we were skinheads. We wore swastikas and shaved heads, and you could identify us pretty easily. So we decided at that time to grow our hair out, to trade in our boots for suits, and we encouraged people to get jobs in law enforcement, to go to the military and get training, and to recruit there.
Which is why it was hard to spot the racists amid the violence of Charlottesville.
So Charlottesville is a seminal moment in this country for hate.
Orrin Siegel tracks the white supremacist transformation as director of the Center on Extremism at the Anti-Defamation League. The ADL trains law enforcement officers in 250 agencies.
You know, look no further than Charlottesville. One of the lasting impressions people have are these white kids with polo shirts and khaki pants, almost look like a fraternity scene. But they're holding tiki torches and they're talking about how the Jews are responsible for the ills of this country. They're racist, they're anti-immigrant, they're misogynist. But they look like our kids. That's the changing face of hate in this country.
Since 9/11, the country has been focused on radical Islamic terrorism, but what do the facts tell you?
The data tells us this: 74% of extremist-related killings in this country in the last 10 years have been carried out by right-wing extremists, not Islamic extremists.
Including white supremacists.
Yes, so white supremacists in particular have been responsible for a majority of the killings, even in the last 10 years.
It is social media that propels the movement's momentum. Posts like these promoted the Charlottesville protest, which drew people from 35 states. It was the largest white supremacy rally in 15 years. The most common hashtag for racist tweets now is white genocide.
And it's these types of things that appeal to young people who, frankly, are living in an environment right now where it's tough to find something to believe in.
Today, Picciolini is trying to give white supremacists something else to believe in. He says he's counseled 200 members of the movement.
You've got to be dealing with some stress, and I want to know how you're dealing with it.
He's sought out by parents and courts. In Chicago, a man who broke windows and painted swastikas on a synagogue was sentenced to a year of counseling with Picciolini.
They call you Nazi Dean in grammar school?
Yeah.
Dean Chabot is another neo-Nazi who followed Picciolini out of white supremacy.
Well, Dean, do you consider yourself to be out, or do you consider yourself to be in the process?
I'm completely out. Actually, doing this interview is the final step.
How so?
Once this airs, there's no going back. If you try to go back in, someone's going to kill you.
This interview wasn't truly his final step.
Dean, would you mind showing me these tattoos?
Yes, sir.
And how old were you when you got these?
It's about 15 to 17.
And when you got the tattoos, you thought what?
I just thought that it was complete. I finally have my ink.
Finally have your ink. You were all in, indelibly in the movement.
Yep.
Dean, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready for this.
Picciolini arranged for a plastic surgeon to erase the last traces of Chabot's former life.
The reason why I'm doing this is because it's ending a chapter in my life, getting the hate off my skin.
Good for you. When you first sit down with one of these young men you're trying to turn around, what do you say to him?
I'm there to listen because they're used to people not listening to them.
His hardest case is the most notorious white supremacist of our time. In 2015, Dylan Roof murdered 9 African Americans during Bible study in Charleston, South Carolina.
I had to do it because somebody had to do something. Because black people are killing white people every day.
Picciolini wrote to Roof in the hope that Roof would express remorse. Roof responded this way to Picciolini's letter.
Well, it starts off with, traitor, you've really cashed in, haven't you? I know you won't be, but you really should be ashamed of yourself. I hope you know that you are 100 times worse than the Jews you've surrounded yourself with.
What does that tell you?
That tells me he is completely indoctrinated by these alternate sets of facts, these conspiracy theories, this rhetoric that's pushed by the movement that puts all the blame on Jewish people, that he's so entrenched in that information that he's been fed that's become his reality.
Redemption comes to those who face the evil they have done. Christian Picciolini's first job after white supremacy was as a computer technician, and by chance he was sent to work at a high school, Eisenhower High School, where he apologized to Johnny Holmes, who was then still head of security.
I knew it was genuine, and he was emotional, And it was a very, very special moment, that exchange.
I am forever, forever grateful. And that's really important for me to communicate.
I'm so happy for you, and I'm so glad that it happened. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think my biggest regret, aside from the people that I physically hurt, were all the young, promising people who could have had a normal, great life if I hadn't stepped in their way, if I hadn't recruited them. You know, there are many that went to prison, many that ended up dead, and that's my biggest regret.
Do you fear for your safety?
I receive death threats on a daily basis. But the way I look at it is, for 8 years of my life in my youth, I was willing to die for something that was wrong. So if I wasn't doing what I was doing to try and help pull people out of this movement, I don't know that I'd be able to live with myself.
There's no question Bryant Venus betrayed America. What you'll have to decide for yourself is whether he's done enough to atone for his crimes. The New York City man, raised Catholic on Long Island, joined Al-Qaeda in 2008. But after he was caught, Venus became an informant, cooperating with the FBI. Today, U.S. prosecutors say Bryant Venus may have been the most valuable witness ever in the war on Al-Qaeda. Venus impressed prosecutors and the judge in his case so much that they prepared to shield him from the prospect of Al-Qaeda's revenge by putting him in the federal witness protection program. All was prepared until Bryant Venus says he was double-crossed.
You can assume that Al-Qaeda wants to kill you.
Yes.
Right now, today.
Yes.
Why be on television?
To let people know what went wrong.
Life went wrong for Bryant Venus at an early age. He was a troubled teenager. His mother kicked him out. Venus was searching for purpose and converted to Islam. Later, he was seduced by the online fanaticism of Al-Qaeda recruiter Anwar al-Awlaki.
We are fighting for a noble cause. We are fighting for God.
Al-Awlaki was an American, killed back in 2011 by a U.S. drone.
A lot of his sermons very captivating, very mesmerizing, I guess you could say. He was talking about the injustices in the world, oppression going on in the Middle East, and it hit me in my heart.
And you decided that the problems in the Middle East were your problems.
It was a problem that I could get involved in, yes.
In 2007, at the age of 24, Venus journeyed to Pakistan and Afghanistan.
You wanted to kill Americans.
At the time, yes.
Venus found himself welcomed by terrorists who had longed for an American recruit who traveled on a U.S. passport.
I asked somebody, I was like, what group is this? And he says, no, this is Al-Qaeda. I said, this is Al-Qaeda? And he says, yeah. I'm like, this is not what you see in the videos. This is not what you see on the news.
What do you mean?
Usually you see monkey bars where guys are training or crawling underneath barbed wire, and I didn't do any of that. That's not how it was when I was there.
What type of training did you get in this Al-Qaeda camp?
Okay, so we did basic Soviet weapons. They go a little bit into explosive theory, suicide bombing vests.
Venus says a high-ranking Al-Qaeda leader asked him for advice on possible targets in the U.S.
I gave information on the Long Island Railroad, a plot on how to attack it. Basically the tunnel that connects all the trains that lead into Manhattan. So if the tunnel is destroyed, then it would hurt the economy in New York.
They wanted to attack the economy of the United States.
Yes, sir. The death toll isn't really the primary target.
They'd probably never heard of the Long Island Railroad before. You might have relatives or friends on the railroad.
Yeah, very possible, yeah.
How do you feel about that now?
Regretful. Actually, I'm very thankful nobody got hurt. And it was in the idea stages, and that's as far as it went.
Did you take part on any attacks on U.S. bases in Afghanistan?
Yes, sir. I was part of a defensive team to protect the group that was launching the rockets.
What was your job?
In case a Pakistani helicopter came, we were supposed to attack that helicopter so it wouldn't attack the group down below.
In 2008, after 7 months in terrorist camps, Vinyas took a short break to visit the city of Peshawar. Apparently, the Pakistanis were watching. He was arrested, turned over to the United States, and within days found himself in federal prison in Brooklyn. There, FBI agents offered him a choice: life in prison or tell all about Al-Qaeda. To help convince him, agents took him to Coney Island.
They took you to Nathan's hot dog stand?
Well, I was in the car, and then one detective went and got an order, brought it back.
And brought you a hot dog?
Hot dogs, burgers, fries, drink.
And they showed you around Coney Island, and they said, you can have a life again.
Yes. He holds out his arms. He says, you really want to go back to prison and go to Supermax for the rest of your life? And I said, you know what, this is my chance to get a second chance at life. And I said, you know what, I'll take it.
So Vinyas decided to plead guilty. His sentencing was postponed until the government could assess the quality of his cooperation. Confined to prison, Vinyas spent 8 years, meeting more than 100 times with prosecutors and the FBI.
Vinyas changed the way we thought about how Al-Qaeda recruits and who Al-Qaeda recruits.
Andrew McCabe was the head of FBI counterterrorism and oversaw the Vinyas case. This was before McCabe became better known for opening 2 investigations of President Trump.
How valuable was Bryant Vinyas to the FBI?
Incredibly valuable. Through his testimony, through his debriefings, identifying people, teaching us how he had walked this pathway from Long Island, New York, into Al-Qaeda.
You didn't know that stuff before?
Learning about his experience completely broke the mold from the way that we thought business was happening. Prior to Vinyas, the idea that any American could just head to Pakistan and go seek out Al-Qaeda and affiliate with that group was something we thought couldn't be done.
He was a game changer for the FBI in terms of Al-Qaeda?
I would say so, yes.
His information has stopped more attacks than you can even conceive of.
Steve Zissou is a defense lawyer with a top security clearance. He's represented several terrorism suspects, including Bryant Vinyas.
I have reviewed both classified and unclassified information, and the government's submissions to the court make it unequivocally clear that his information stopped attacks, saved lives, and permitted our military to continue the battle, to take it to them, if you will.
Were drone strikes launched on the basis of his information?
No doubt about it.
Vinyas's defense attorney points to drone strikes that killed 14 suspected jihadists where Vinyas had lived.
So they were killing these people who used to be your friends?
Yes, sir.
How did you feel about that?
At one time they were my friends, but you know, if I have to leave that life behind, I can't have them be my friends no more.
In 2017, prosecutors wrote this to the judge in Vinyas's case, Nicholas Garifas. To say that the defendant provided substantial assistance to the government is an understatement. Indeed, he may have been the single most valuable cooperating witness with respect to Al-Qaeda. Judge Garifas agreed, adding that Vinyas had placed his life in grave danger to help his country.
He was the extraordinary case. Mr. Vinyas has certain God-given gifts, one of which is that he has a photographic memory. He remembered every place he had been. He remembered most of the people he had met. He was able to explain to the government how Al-Qaeda recruits. That's why he was so valuable.
With that in mind, Judge Garifas ruled that the 8 years Vinyas had spent cooperating from a prison cell were enough.
The sentence was time served with an additional 90 days.
Why 90 days?
In order for him to have the opportunity to be placed in witness protection once he's released.
So it was your understanding that he was going to be brought into the witness protection program?
Yes, it absolutely was.
And what happened?
So on the 88th day of the 90-day period, I was advised that he had been refused witness protection status by this office at the Justice Department, the Office of Enforcement Operations. There had never been a problem before in any of my cases involving cooperators who sought witness protection.
In prison, Venus already had been in witness protection. Judge Garifas told us it's routine for the same protection to continue after release. But the U.S. Department of Justice Witness Security Program, known as WITSEC, turned him down with no explanation.
They don't give the reasons, and the prosecutors moved for reconsideration. Reconsideration was denied.
The prosecutors work for the Justice Department. The FBI agents are part of the Justice Department. All of them agree that he should be in the Witness Protection Program, and then another agency inside the Justice Department overrules them?
That's what troubles me, that they've had 8,700, at least 8,700 cooperators placed in witness protection. And I know some of these cooperators. They've been my defendants. I've had virtually the entire Banana organized crime family on my docket. I've had many trials involving murderers and drug kingpins on my docket. So I'm not a newcomer to this process. And I was shocked that they took such a cavalier, irresponsible step as they did to deny Mr. Venus witness protection.
The Justice Department's WITSEC office declined an interview, but in a statement to 60 Minutes, it hinted at an explanation. It singled out just one of the factors in its decision process. WITSEC must take into account the risks associated with giving a person a new identity and placing them in a community that is unaware of the person's actual identity. Judge Garifas argues that if Venus does pose a continuing risk to the community, then witness protection would ensure that the government kept tabs on him. And after all Venus has done, Garifas says, the Justice Department has an obligation to keep him safe.
It's extremely rare, Your Honor, in my experience, to have a federal judge talk about a case. And I wonder why you have done this today.
I've never done it before in 18 years as a judge. I won't allow the folks who made this decision to hide behind their decision. And it's a potential problem in the future.
This would have a chilling effect, in your opinion, on people who might consider cooperating in the future.
That's right.
Today, Bryant Venus is on his own.
Right now, I'm working washing dishes at a restaurant. So that's how I'm paying the bills.
The greatest Al-Qaeda informant of all time, we're told, is washing dishes.
That's correct.
You're probably the only dishwasher who lectures at West Point.
Yeah.
After 8 years in prison cooperating with the government, Venus is still fighting terror. He's spoken at the U.S. Military Academy and to research organizations about the false lure of jihad. And he's still helping investigators.
Do you consider yourself, as we sit here right now,
yes,
square with the United States?
I always feel that it's a continuing process that I should do for years to come.
I don't forgive him for seeking to engage in jihad against the United States. It's not that you forgive him, but he turned a corner and he was successful in doing it. The government needs to meet its part of the bargain.
In the long, bloody history of terrorism, few acts of violence have been more savage or shocking than those carried out by ISIS, including the beheadings of young American hostages in 2014. The videos went viral and catapulted ISIS onto the world stage. For the parents of one of those Americans, Art and Shirley Sotloff, the murder of their 31-year-old son, Stephen, was shattering because of the brutality of his execution and because they think he could have been saved, if not for what even the White House now admits was its own ineffectiveness in dealing with the crisis. But what really sealed their son's fate, the Sotlofs believe, is the government's policy against paying ransom.
I am Stephen Joel Sotloff. I'm sure you know exactly who I am by now and why I am appearing before you.
Stephen Joel Sotloff was beheaded by ISIS. His execution on September 2nd, 2014 was seen around the world on a video. Did you ever watch it?
I have viewed Stephen's body with his head on his chest.
I had to see that because I needed to be sure that that was him.
Stephen was born and raised in Miami, attended college in Israel, and became a freelance journalist, reporting from war zones where information was scarce, like Yemen, Benghazi, Libya, and Syria, where he went in the summer of 2013. Just before he crossed into Aleppo, he called his dad.
He contacted me and told me not to worry, but if I don't hear from him within 4 days, that I should get in touch with one of his colleagues.
Whoa, that's ominous. He didn't hear from his son, not just for 4 days. It was 4 excruciating months. Then finally, they got a ransom letter with demands for the government to free all the Muslims in U.S. custody. Or...
Then there's a last option. 100 million euros will secure Stephen's release.
Which is something like
$137 million.
What was your reaction?
The reaction was, how the hell are we going to get this money together?
They thought the U.S. government would help them, but they were bewildered and then infuriated when they say they met a stone wall, the U.S. policy forbidding the paying of ransom.
It's some of the hardest work that I've done.
Lisa Monaco, assistant to President Obama for counterterrorism, oversaw the hostage crisis.
These are horrible choices. On the one hand, if you don't pay a ransom, you are putting an innocent life at risk. On the other hand, if you do, you're fueling the very activity that's put them at risk in the first place.
Did you feel ever that the policy might be wrong?
The policy, and it's been a decades-old policy, of not paying ransom, I think is the right policy.
So you didn't question that?
We didn't. We believe that that was important to maintain.
But with the exception of the UK, most European countries do pay ransom without publicly admitting it. Stephen was held with 22 other hostages, including the 3 Americans, James Foley, Peter Kasich, and Kayla Mueller, who were all killed. Once the European governments paid ransom, ISIS released their citizens, one of whom smuggled out this letter from Stephen.
He was speaking how he can't stand seeing all the captives leave from all different countries. How could the United States just stand by and not do anything?
As the European hostages came out and spoke of mock executions and waterboardings, the Sotlofs decided they would try to raise at least some of the money themselves. But then they and the other U.S. families attended a meeting in Washington with officials on the National Security Council.
All of us were saying, well, why can't we try to save our kids? And they said, because it's against the law. We do not negotiate with terrorists.
Did they say you would be prosecuted?
They said you could be prosecuted, and also your donors could be prosecuted.
So if I gave you money, I could be prosecuted?
Yes. Correct.
Did anybody say, are you kidding me?
Yes, they did. Yes,
so it was a little bit contentious?
Oh, yes, we kind of verbally fought back.
They were threatened that they could be prosecuted. Is that true?
So what's true is that some families felt threatened, and that was unacceptable, and that should never have happened.
Are you suggesting they may not have been threatened?
No, what I'm suggesting is, I wasn't present when any threats were made, but what matters, Lesley, is that these families felt that way as they were going through the most horrific time they will ever encounter.
But was that the policy? Was that true? Could they have actually been prosecuted? Could someone who contributed to pay ransom also be prosecuted?
So what's true is that the Justice Department has never prosecuted a family or friends of a family that has paid a ransom.
But was it the policy?
Well, what's the policy is the United States government will not pay ransoms or make concessions to terrorist hostage takers.
That policy is based in part on a presumption that paying ransom invites more hostage taking. But that is refuted by a new study that examined the case of every known Western hostage taken since 9/11. It was co-authored by Peter Bergen, a counterterrorism expert for the nonpartisan New America Foundation.
They don't know necessarily you're American when they take you. It's sort of a target of opportunity. So some countries are known to pay ransom, the French, the Germans, the Spanish.
Even though they don't admit it.
They don't admit it, but they do. Their citizens have much better outcomes than Americans. Americans are huge outliers here. You're twice as likely to have a negative outcome compared to every other Western hostage.
You say negative outcome, you mean murdered.
Murdered, die in captivity, or just remain in captivity.
14 of the European hostages held with Stephen made it home. Those from countries that don't pay ransom didn't. 4 Americans and 2 Brits died. I keep playing in my own head this horrible situation where the American hostages watch the other ones be set free. And I wonder if it wouldn't have been better if our government did what the European governments did, which was pay ransom but then deny it in order to save their citizens. Why couldn't we have done that?
We'd still be fueling their terror activity, whether it's hostage taking or whether it's terrorist plots to kill Americans here in the homeland or elsewhere is not activity that the United States government should be in the business of funding.
What do you say to critics of the policy of not paying ransom, that the beheadings of the Americans ended up having more value to ISIS than any money would have been? That's really what put them on the international map. These beheading videos were a gold mine for ISIS. Do you see it that way?
I don't. And I think it's giving brutal, murderous thugs too much credit.
What about the argument that if you pay ransom, you're just encouraging them to kidnap more? Also, that the money is going to go toward terrorism. And so what's the comeback to that? It's a hard thing.
Going back to what President Obama said to us in person, that he would do anything in his power to save his children if he was in the same situation. And I say that he should put himself in the same situation. And I think that the government has a responsibility to protect its citizens in whatever way that they can.
What do you say when you hear people argue that Stephen knew he was putting his life at risk by going into Syria at that point, and you know the kind of the burdens on him?
Stephen was driven by truth, that he had to report the truth. He saw that there wasn't information coming out of these areas, and that's really what drove him.
In the summer of 2014, nearly a year after Stephen was abducted, President Obama ordered a military operation to rescue the hostages.
This involved a large number of military service members and special operators.
Putting their lives on the line.
Putting their lives on the line. Going in to the heart of ISIL territory in Syria. And as we were monitoring the operation, word came back, some very devastating words. It's a dry hole, which meant that they weren't there.
This is James Wright Foley.
About 7 weeks later, James Foley became the first of 3 American hostages beheaded. Stephen appears at the end of the video.
The life of this American citizen, Obama, depends on your next decision.
The Sotlofs then received an audio message that sounds like Stephen was forced to record, designed to pressure the U.S. government. It was given them by the FBI.
This is always tough for me because it's actually his voice. And it just makes me feel like he's still in the room with us.
To Mom, I do not have much time.
and will probably not get this opportunity again, so I would like to get straight to the point. My life depends on Obama's next decision. Mom, please don't let Obama kill me. Mom, you can still save my life. Just like the families of my previous cellmates, who I'm sure you've met, fight for me. I love you.
Powerful.
I gotta blow my nose, I'm sorry. I could excuse myself.
It's cruel, very.
I don't know what they wanted us to do.
And always saying mom like that.
Mom?
Mom, mom.
Yeah.
They learned of Stephen's death a few days after that.
And he's in a much better place.
We know he's in a better place.
And, you know, he isn't suffering anymore. Sometimes.
A couple of months later, they met with President Obama.
I asked the president, I said, how did you feel when my son was being held up by his neck and they were saying that this message is for you, President Obama. Stephen's life depends on your next decision. How do you feel about that? And he looked down and he really couldn't answer the question. I guess it's a question that shocked him. Whereas it shocked me that I even asked him that.
How do you feel now about what happened, maybe your role with the families whose kids were beheaded?
I feel like, in many respects, we did not do right by these families, that we failed them.
You feel you failed the families?
We have Americans who were brutally killed.
After the beheadings, she put together a task force to review how the government handles hostage-taking that included a meeting with the families.
It was a lot of raw emotion and a lot of frustration and grief.
Anger at you?
Anger at us, anger at the loss of their loved ones, anger at the government.
One of the task force's conclusions was that the various government agencies working on hostages were not coordinating with each other, which led to the creation of this new unit.
Have we seen any claims of responsibility? Not yet.
Led by the FBI, it brings together all the key agencies that work on hostages, including the CIA, Defense, and State Departments, in one place to work side by side 24/7. They share intelligence and keep the families informed.
Okay. Any results?
No, sir, not yet.
However, the no ransom policy was not changed. It wasn't even reviewed, though the Justice Department, in this public document, all but promised not to prosecute a family or their friends who do pay ransom to terrorists. Is it a good policy now? Are you happy with the way it has turned out?
It's a better policy than what it was. I mean, now it gives at least people the opportunity to try to save their family members.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's far from really solving the problem because there's still money that has to be raised and paid, and the average family just can't do that.
And you think our government should?
Absolutely.
It's a human life. How do you let an American go like that? Just let them be killed, murdered. Every human is valuable. Everybody has a family, and they want them to come home.
The Sotlofs have started a foundation in Stephen's memory called 2 Lives that, among other things, funds safety training for freelance journalists traveling to war zones. Today, there are still dozens of Americans being held hostage. In 12 days, Donald Trump will have to decide on the best strategy for getting them home.